Good afternoon, everybody. Just a second while we load up the presentation.
Just tell them the topic.
So today we're going to talk about HR's evolution. And as soon as we upload the presentation, I'm going to begin. But thank you for the introduction. That's a lot of information. Indeed, I have been working in human resources since early 1994. After 2 years of frustrating architecture studies, which I found out when I was a teenager, I thought that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an architect. And after studying architecture for 2 years and working with an architect, I realized that all I wanted was to draw and design rather than being in the construction site fighting because the window was not where it was supposed to be and the floors were not the ones that we wanted to do. And coincidentally, I got a job as an assistant of a recruiter in a consulting company, and that's where I fell in love with HR. That's the moment I realized that HR is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So it's been 24 years since that moment, and I can say that I don't regret the decision that I made. So I'm definitely very excited to be here again. I presented last year, and it's definitely a humbling experience to be surrounded by so many great HR leaders from different countries in the world. Okay, so I'm ready to start. So to talk about this topic, I would like to ask a question. What comes to your mind when you think about evolution? Anyone? So I imagine the first thing that comes to your mind might be something like this. Or some people may think of something like this. But evolution indeed is a change that occurs throughout time. So what we want to talk about today is how evolution has impacted our lives in organizations and in our function as human resources. So what happens when you don't adapt to change, and what have we learned about it? So I want to give you a few references, which I'm sure the majority will be familiar about this. So anyone remember Blockbuster? So Blockbuster had over 60,000 employees, and they had over 9,000 stores across the world. So this was a very successful franchise, and everyone loved the fact that they would go and rent their movie. But what happened? Eventually people wanted something different. People didn't want to pay a fine for returning the movie late, or sometimes you didn't want to get out of bed and go rent that movie. So Netflix came about and other ways of streaming movies. So Blockbuster didn't seize the opportunity to change, therefore they died. What about Kodak? Another amazing company in their days. They had 89% market share in the 70s. And they also didn't seize an opportunity to evolve with time. And digital photography came about. And what happened? Kodak died. They never thought that people would want something that was not a paper photography in their hands. So they didn't adapt with times, and they died. Toys R Us, another case. So Toys R Us started in the 40s, and they had over 1,600 stores worldwide. And what happened with them is that they also didn't see the opportunity of evolving with time because online shopping came about. People, just picture the rush during Christmas time or the holidays. A lot of people didn't want to go to the store and fight with someone else because they wanted the same Barbie doll for the daughter or the same plane for their boys. And what happened is that they didn't adapt with time. And what they last year, actually, they filed for bankruptcy. So this is another case of how organizations, if they don't evolve, if they don't adapt, they will perish. So what has evolution showed us? I'm going to talk about National Geographic, and I'm sure that this is a brand that all of you know. And they launched their first magazine in 1888. So this company has a long history. And they got to a point where they had 12 million readers every month. And what happened with time? So they started struggling again, as many companies do. Their readers were down to 6 million. And with time, they realized that people were not necessarily as interested in going to buy the actual magazine. They wanted something different. So in 1997, the first channels from the National Geographic franchise were launched. And I'm sure that you can relate to many of these channels. And now they are very successful in what they do. So this is one company that shows us that if they embrace change and adapt and evolve, they remain successful and competitive. Another example, which I'm sure doesn't need much explanation, is Apple, who in the late 70s, they started with the personal computer. So this was fairly new. And what happened with them is that during this evolution of personal computers and technology, in the 90s, they realized that it was not as profitable because competition was very, very tough. A lot of companies were introducing computers in the environment. So what they did is they reinvented themselves. And then they became a company that was focused on consumer electronics and mobile phones. So now, Apple is rated one of the top tech companies in the world. So why am I talking about all of this? Is because I want to give you a glimpse of what's going on in the world and the companies that have failed to evolve and how they've perished versus the ones that have embraced change and become successful. So if you take a minute to think, what happens in 60 seconds nowadays? This is our reality today. In 1 minute, 452,000 tweets are sent, and I'm sure you know where many of those tweets are coming from. In 1 minute, you have 120 new accounts created in LinkedIn. So this is our reality nowadays. It's a digital era. And I'm sure from the different lectures you've attended between yesterday and today, many of the topics have been around digitalization and how HR has to be digital. But the reality is that this is what's going on now. Our employees are part of that. We are part of that. And just by raise of hands, how many of you have a Facebook account? Okay, I would say 100%. How many of you check your Facebook account 5 times in the day? Raise your hand. 10 times in the day? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our employees are doing that. We are doing that. You know, when you think that we're connected to our phones, we're connected to technology from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep. And I'm sure many can relate. You know, you wake up in the morning and the first thing you do is grab your phone and check the phone if there are messages. Open your Facebook, open your LinkedIn or Instagram. And this is the reality that we face today. So how has this impacted human resources and how have we evolved in the HR field throughout time? So let me talk to you about HR through the years. And if we start in the industrial era, you know, when HR, back then actually was the personnel department, what people were doing were actually just solving union issues. You know, the personnel department was created to address these issues with the employees in the factories, okay, or in the companies. But then, you know, as we evolved, you can see that HR became, in the 20th century, a department that was there, and these are the paradigms that we see. You know, HR was there to hire and to fire. HR is the office police. HR should be done by the HR department only, not the managers. And it's funny because you mentioned in your presentation how our expectation of people managers is that they are also HR people. You know, they manage as well as us what's going on in the business. So it's not only an HR's responsibility. And another paradigm that we had before is that HR doesn't really understand the business. And that's something that we needed to overcome because many HR professionals actually make a lot of effort to understand what's going on in their businesses. Because if you can't understand your business, how can you support it? So 21st century HR is actually making sure that HR is a true business partner. You know, that we move from transactional to transformational, and everyone is an HR manager. So completely agree with your presentation. All of the people managers in the organization are HR managers. You know, the problem is not, oh, please, please, go talk to HR. You know, they send employees to us because they don't want to deal with the dirty stuff. They don't want to have to give a bad message to the employee. Let HR take care of that. And that's something that we have to fight on a regular basis because we have to train our people managers to be HR managers as well. So where does that leave us in the digital era HR? So we have moved from calling our people frontline employees to call them colleagues, from line managers to people managers, from a top-down approach where we tell the employees what we want them to hear to the employees telling us what they want us to hear. And this is very important because this makes a big difference in the way that we manage our workforce nowadays. We also have moved from traditional ways of doing things to non-traditional work arrangements. And one of the presentations yesterday in the morning actually got to me because when I was hearing about how many deaths we have in Mumbai because of train accidents, people commuting to work, people who are actually getting up, you know, getting dressed and trying to get to the office on time just because they have a responsibility. You know, it's sad to hear that people are trying to get to work on time because they don't want their day to be deducted from the paycheck. But we as an organization are not open to changing the schedule, to having different options so that people can start work at different hours. I mean, the reality is that we have to think differently. You know, HR is not just about following the policies and procedures to the dot. We have to understand that the reality in the organization is very different. And something as simple as the time you start work, the time you start your shift, can make a huge impact in our employees. And seeing the statistics from here, I mean, it can actually save lives. So this is something that is very important in the way that we evolve as an HR function. The other thing, in terms of communication, we have evolved from having, can anyone remember the cork bulletin boards that we had in the office where you just, you know, put the papers with the announcements that you wanted employees to be aware of? Or the newsletters that we actually had to print to make sure that every employee got the information. Now we have real-time communication channels. And I want to share with you something that we just did in our company in Myanmar. And we launched Workplace by Facebook. How many of you have heard of Workplace? Raise your hand. Okay, not many. So Facebook had this, sorry for that. Facebook had this brilliant idea of, if everyone is familiar of the Facebook platform, okay, this thing is going crazy. The Facebook platform, why not introduce something in the workplace so that people can communicate real time and learn about whatever is going on in the organization? So we launched this last year, and in 24 hours, over 80% of employees had signed up on this. So that just tells you how easy it is to implement something new when our workforce is millennials. You know, for them, this is very straightforward, it's very easy, and they love it. So now, when we have an event or a message, you know, our CEO streams live, employees are commenting, they like it, they love it, or maybe they don't like the message. But the fact is that we have evolved from having that cork bulletin board to having channels where we can actually communicate with employees real time, but that they can also communicate with us. The other thing that we have changed in HR is that classroom training, and don't get me wrong, it still happens. We still sit in a classroom and receive training, but we are now providing different options for our employees on how to learn. And e-learning is not a new thing. It's not something that was just launched. It's been happening for many years now. But it's a great way to make sure that your employees who are, for example, not sitting in the same office as you are, can also attend the training, to provide options for continuous development that they can do in their own time. And artificial intelligence is something very interesting here because a couple of years ago, I attended a conference in Florida, and we had a training on, there was this, how do you call it? So we had this person, I would call it a person because it actually behaved like one, it was a robot in a way. And what they were doing is they programmed this robot to have answers on how to train managers on labor relations, how to resolve conflict. Obviously, you can imagine everyone in the room is sitting there, jaws, like, you're sitting there like, how is this robot or this avatar gonna teach us? How are they gonna deal with the issues that happen with employees? But it's amazing the way that it interacts with you and the way that it's programmed so that you actually feel that you're talking to a real person. The way they move, the way they behave, how they can actually say like, oh, you're dressed very nice today. And you can program the levels of anger in this avatar so that you practice as a manager how to deal with difficult conversations. So you have from level 0, which is a person that doesn't really fight that much, to level 5, where it's a very disgruntled employee, and this helps managers practice. So if that was something that I saw a couple of years ago, and it was already in the works, think of where we are now and where we can be in terms of development for the future. And finally, talk about traditional recruitment that we had. And this is your typical, you know, you used to post in the newspaper, actually, in the job section, you know, the advertisings you had for the vacancies in your organization. It moved to job fairs. Now people have LinkedIn. And next week, actually, we're going to have the first event in Myanmar where we're actually going to give candidates a virtual reality tour of our offices. So people will go to the booth, they will put the Samsung goggles, and they will actually have the virtual tour of Oriru's office. And this is the first time that is happening in Myanmar. And this is a new way to engage with our candidates. Remember that nowadays, the candidate has all the choices. They're the ones that decide which company they actually want to work for. In the past, you know, as a company, you know that your brand will attract people and you feel comfortable because they need you more than you needed them. Right now, the tables have turned. We need them. We need that talent. And in a country like Myanmar, where telecommunications is not an old industry, where you have hundreds of thousands of candidates that are prepared, we need to make sure that people can actually, you know, be attracted to work with us, and they want to have that experience of being with one of the best. So moving from traditional recruitment to digital talent acquisition is very important. Make use of the tools that you have available. You know, you can do interviews online. You can do the whole process from the application to the evaluation. Everything can be done online, even through apps. So that way you capture all the information from the candidates, and it's easier to do everything. So talk about the HR in this digital era. So human resources now has to deal with a lot of new challenges. So the first one, very important, is that we're dealing with a millennial workforce. Our employees are not the same that want to join the company and have a career that will last 10, 15 years. If we can get them to stay for 2 years, it's a massive accomplishment. 1 year is a massive accomplishment because, employees nowadays, they need to feel engaged for enough time for them to want to actually stay and have a career with us. We have to have a stronger focus on branding and employee experience. So this comes back to, how do we keep our employees engaged? How do we make their experience in our organization something that is meaningful, that makes them want to, be loyal and commit to a company for a longer period of time? We're dealing with a multicultural workforce. So to give you an example, in our organization, just the executive committee alone, we are 11 members, and there's 9 nationalities within us 11 in the executive committee. So that just gives you an idea of the diversity that we have to deal with in the organization. And if you go down, there's many other nationalities. So we have to be able, as HR, to manage this multicultural workforce. Also, geographic dispersion. You don't have all the employees in the same office, and that's something that you also need to address. I remember when I was working in Samsung, I was based in Panama, so my headquarters was South Korea. And when we had HR video conferences, can you imagine people from all over the world trying to join for one single call? I would be in the office at 3 a.m. because we had people from the US, people from Africa, people from Asia, everyone trying to join, and we had to find the best time that would work for all of us. So how do you address a dispersed workforce, and how do you make sure that everyone feels still part of the team and engaged with the organization, even if they're not sitting in the same office? Constant innovation. So nowadays, and this is part of this evolution and this constant change, is we have to constantly keep innovating. Whatever you thought was the latest product, the latest service, it's no longer valid if you don't continuously innovate. So it's something that in our field, as HR, we also need to continue to innovate what we do in the way that we engage with employees, in the way that we train them and develop them. So it's something that we have to be mindful of. And finally, new technologies. So how do we embrace the technologies that are out there, that, that are available for us in the HR field, so that we take advantage of them and use them? As I said, virtual reality. I mean, who would have thought that you're going to take your candidate through a virtual tour of your office? Let's use it. This is not only for marketing purposes. This is not only for a video game. Let's use these technologies to our favor so that we can maximize its potential. And finally, upskilling your employees. So all the companies are talking about how they become digital. And that's great. We can digitalize our processes. We can make sure that everything is done online or through an app. But if we don't upskill our employees, they're not going to be ready to manage this digitalization. So we have to decide first and plan around what are the technical competencies that our employees need nowadays. What are the leadership competencies that they require nowadays? And based on that, we develop our people. Because otherwise, we're going to have the best products out there. We're going to have everything in a digital platform, and our employees are just going to stare at it and think, yeah, so now what? So this one is very important that we keep in mind for the challenges that we have to face in the future. And what is expected of HR now? So this, I'm not inventing fire here. I'm just going to share something that I'm sure everyone knows deep down, but we don't necessarily pay enough attention to it. So the first thing that is expected from us is that we need to have clarity of the business strategy, because HR will never be a successful partner to the business if we're not clear where the company wants to go. Then we need to understand the environment. And I'm not just talking about the competitors that we have in our own industry, is what's happening in general, what's happening in the environment, because the way that things move and shift are in our countries or in our organization or, in our continents, it will tell us a lot about how we need to evolve as an HR function to support the business better. Data analytics, this is extremely important. HR is not just about how you feel or how your employees feel. You also need to understand a little bit more about them. And data is critical for us to be successful. So let's talk about our employees' age, for example. If you think about launching a benefits program that has, let's say, retirement fund. This is a great initiative, but if your population is between 23 and 29, believe me that you're going to waste your money launching something, an amazing initiative, but if 80% or 90% of your workforce is between 23 and 29, they won't care. So how you take all this information and convert it into something meaningful for you to be able to have the best strategy in place. Clarity on HR's priorities. Again, you might have all these amazing ideas, projects, and initiatives that you have, but if you don't prioritize based on what the business needs, you're going to be wasting time, wasting resources, and not being effective as a real partner. And finally, clear action plans. Who is doing what? When are you doing it by? Because if you don't have the proper execution excellence, you're going to fail. So these are the things that I would say that are very important of what's expected of us and that we need to keep in mind in order to continue to be successful in our organizations. So the big question, can HR survive and adapt? Are we all up to the challenge? I will just finish with this quote from Leon Brown, who is a baseball player. You cannot evolve unless you're willing to change. So I encourage everyone to think about all the options you have and all the things you need to do to change in order for you to evolve and adapt with time. So thank you, everybody, for your time.
Very quick. I saw the challenges that you noted down, what HR would face. And one of the things that interested me was a multicultural workforce. So it's just a question. The question is about your perspective on how you think you can take up this challenge now and in the future.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question. Definitely, one of the ways that you can address this, first of all, is listen. You have to have an open mind when you're talking to people, regardless of where they come from, what religion, what sex, what preferences. If you are open to listening to employees and people in general, you'll be able to manage situations better. You need to let them feel that you care, that you genuinely care for them, and that you're trying to understand. You may not understand everything. You may not even have been to their countries or understand their backgrounds. But as long as people feel that they're listened to, that they're cared for, they will open up, and it will make the whole process much easier.
So a research agency called PageUp has recently put up a research that HR faces extinction if they fail to reinvent themselves. And until they show measurable outcomes, a lot of work we do is not closely rated in time and not always measurable in, very quantifiable terms. So some insights about that.
Thank you. Well, definitely, anything and anyone faces extinction if we're not able to adapt and change and evolve. And that's why I kept mentioning all the things that we need to keep in mind in order to remain current, to be able to have that return on investment. If we don't even understand the business strategy, how can there be any ROI in anything that we do? Remember that if we're always going to be considered a cost center, it's always going to be an uphill task. But you have to be strategic about what you do. Your role is not to organize Christmas parties. Your role is not only to be doing like all these, marathon walks. And these are amazing for employees. Some people may like parties. Some people may like sports events. But what we have to do is really add value to the business. So definitely, I think that if we don't reinvent ourselves, if we don't focus on what really adds value to the organization, at some point they might say, so why do I keep these people around? So it's something that we have to always keep in consideration. Yeah.
I saw some underhand dealing. Passing on a mic. Sir, your question has to be brief.
Okay, yes, definitely. Thank you very much. It's a wonderful presentation that we did. In our organization, I'm working in an educational university, and we're also teaching for HR. What I noticed from your presentation that there was two phases, change and transformational phase. There are some people, those belong to the X generation, and we are talking about millennial Y generation. How do you really reconcile so that they can get the proper understanding about the transformational changes needed in HR?
You've got multi-generational.
Multi-generation. So
You already got 11 nationalities.
Yeah, now generation. So it goes back to the fact that you need to listen and understand each one. So the needs and priorities that each one will have are very different in terms of development, in terms of benefits, in terms of productivity. So how do you make sure that you tailor to them? First of all, you need to listen, and that's why the bottoms-up approach is very important nowadays, because you need to be able to hear what they're saying. And I'm not just talking about an employee opinion survey. The surveys are very nice and we get a lot of information, but you don't really get the insights that you need to handle the situations with them. And in order for the organization to be successful, and remember that this is not an HR responsibility only, is every people manager needs to also listen, talk to their employees, understand what their needs are, so that we can assist the people managers in being more successful in handling the different generations and the diverse workforce that we may have. Mm-hmm.
We can take one more last question.
A lovely presentation. Thank you very much.
You.
How would you say this applies to smaller companies under 20 employees that don't have a dedicated HR department?
So there has to be someone that actually is taking care of the people stuff, how they call it, because for them it's not like proper human resources.
So that's me.
That's you. So if you deal with the people stuff, whether you're the CEO of the company or the general manager of the company, you still need to spend that time in understanding what your employees need, whether it's 1, 5, or 20. The reason why you have to spend that time, and I won't get tired of saying this because I do believe that this is part of the key to success, is that we stop talking and we start listening. So you need to understand what they need and how you can help them grow. For example, you won't necessarily have the budget to send everyone to a training or bring an expensive trainer to them. However, you can guide them on how to find online trainings that they can take. You may not have a software for talent development, but they can still do an individual development plan in their own ways and tell you where they want to go, what they want to learn, where they aspire to grow to. So you can still take best HR practices and implement in a smaller scale with the budget that you may have that makes sense for your organization. And again, it doesn't matter that it's 5 employees or 20, but you need to listen to them and hear what they want so that you can also assist them in their growth.
Can I share with you what I'm doing at the moment?
Of course.
That offline.
We can have a conversation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But thank you.